Go ahead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. You are now listening to The Right Side. I am your host, Jeff Doggett, coming to you on the greatest station in the nation from the greatest location in the nation. Saying hello this afternoon to everybody listening to us as far north as Kennebunkport, Maine, as far south as Key West, Florida, as far east as Long Island, New York, and as far west as Long Beach, California, and all the points in between. For those of you that are listening to us around the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever greeting best suits the time zone that you are in. There are several things that you can do to stop the spread of respiratory diseases such as COVID-19. Number one, wash your hands with warm water and soap for at least 20 seconds. Now, if you don't know what 20 seconds are, just sing happy birthday to yourself, and when you've completed that song, you've completed 20 seconds. Number two, stay at home when you are sick. Stay at home when you are sick. Stay at home when you are sick. And stay away from people who are sick. Listen, that event, that service, that movie or sporting event that you just have to be there for, or you don't think can go on without you, I've got news for you. It's going to go on without you. So please stay at home when you are sick and stay away from people who are sick. Number three, cover your mouth when you call for a sneeze. Yes, I know that's common sense, but how many of you are like me know that the least common thing these days is common sense? Number four, wipe down frequently touched items and objects with some type of disinfectant, and also keep some disinfectant like some hand sanitizer in your car so that when you pump gas, you can then sanitize your hands as you do not know who touched that pump prior to you touching it. Please also try to refrain, if you can, from touching your eyes and your face with your hands unless they are clean. And this was brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station, No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. Listen, folks, this pandemic is not over. In fact, it's morphed into an endemic. And, numbers are on the rise again, so everybody who thought it was over, it's not over. So please take these precautionary steps that I just laid out for you so that you don't get sick and you don't spread it to someone else as well. If you are in the Cleveland area on the first or third Saturday of each month, I've got some great news for you. At 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., they are giving away a free bag of groceries. That's right, a free bag of groceries. And now listen, you do not have to show proof of residence. So if you're not from the Cleveland area, you can take advantage of this because you don't have to show proof of residence. You do not have to show proof of income. You do not have to show proof of anything. The only thing that you do have to show is up in that you show up and you will receive the free bag of groceries, no questions asked. But not only that, in addition to the free bag of groceries, you also get free clothing for adults and children. So that means you get free clothing for yourself and any children that you have. But wait, it doesn't stop there either, because if you're there between 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., you get a free hot lunch. That's right, a free hot lunch, home-cooked meal, which will be yummy to your tummy, and it's free of charge. And so you ask, when is this again? It's the first and third Saturday of each month. Where? At 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. What time? Between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on those days. And we want to thank the Greater Cleveland Food Bank and also Major Care Ministries and Williams Temple Church of God in Christ, who houses this event each month. If you are new to this program, this is what we do. We talk sports, we talk politics, we talk the issues of the day. I throw some topics out on the table. I give my take on said topics. And then we invite you to call in with your take on those topics at 216-939-5087. 216-939-5087. Now, I've been informed that our phones are working today. They are on a somewhat of a delay, but they are working. So if you want to call in and express your thoughts on what we're talking about today, then please take advantage and do so. And is someone on the line? Because I'm getting feedback right now. I can hear a conversation going on. I don't know. It sounds as if some is hello. Do I have a caller already? I'm getting feedback on the line. I can hear a two-way conversation going on right now. Let's take a short break and let me see if I can get this cleared up. One moment. I'll be right back with you. Okay, sorry for the delay, you all. We got that situation cleared up. I thought we had a call on the line. Perhaps we didn't. Okay, so this is what we have on the table today. Our topics today, we're going to talk about this topic, and this is one that's very hot right now, and that topic is Joe Biden too old to run for a second term for president of the United States? We have some thoughts on that. That's been bannered about here in the news media over the last week or so, and we have our thoughts on that. We're also going to talk about a topic that we didn't get a chance to talk about a couple of weeks ago, and that's this. Should there be term limits for the Congress, the Senate, and the Supreme Court of the United States? We have some thoughts on that. We're also going to talk about should Ryan Day, the Ohio State University head football coach, should Ryan Day be on the hot seat? He is, and we have some thoughts on that. And we're going to give our NFL predictions for week 2. We're not going to cover every game. We're going to cover the games that we think are most important and most relevant to everyone out there. So if I don't cover your team, it's not that I don't think your team is worth talking about. It's just that we just want to look at the games that we think are the most important games of the week. And again, if you're a fan of a team that we don't talk about, I apologize in advance. And I will say in advance, too, that when we do give these predictions, remember this is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not go out and bet the mortgage on that. As a matter of fact, if you are going to bet on the National Football League or any sports for that matter, only bet what you can afford to lose. All right? And if you have a gambling problem, there are gambling help services all across the country that can help you. So our picks and predictions are for entertainment purposes only. They are not meant for you to go out and bet the house on, because if you do and you lose your house, you can't come live with me. So the number once again is 216-939-5087. I have been informed that our phones are working today. They're just on a delay. So if you have any comments or questions about anything that we're going to talk about today, we'd love to hear from you. So let's get right at it. So there's been bandied about over the last couple of weeks or so, well, really most of this year, but especially within the last couple of weeks or so, this question, and that question is Joe Biden too old to run for a second term for President of the United States? There was a recent poll from ABC News and the Washington Post, and that poll showed that 68% of those who polled did think that Joe Biden was too old to run for a second term as president. Now, I'm going to give my thoughts on that, but I want you all to ponder something here before you come to your conclusion. Or if you've already come to a conclusion, maybe what I'm going to put out here for you, if you will, may alter your opinion or conclusion that you've come to, or you might be hard, fast, and hard set in your conclusion, and that's fine too. But I just want to lay this out for you. So, as I said, 68% of those polled in this recent ABC Washington Post poll felt that Joe Biden was too old to be president. And of those polled, there are only 36% gave him an approval rating. And now, at this stage in his presidency, at similar times in other presidencies, just to give you an idea, this poll, this approval rating is lower than what Jimmy Carter was at this time in his in his first term. This is lower than what Gerald Ford was at this time during his first term. And this was lower than Donald Trump was at this time in his term. The only one who had a lower approval rating than Joe Biden at this point in their presidency was Harry S. Truman, who had a 34% approval rating at this time in his first term. But what was interesting about that is that Harry Truman did win re-election. So, you can take that for what it is. And actually, he won re-election in 1948 as he was finishing out the term of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. At this point in his presidency, as you know, you may or may not be aware of if you're not a student of history, is that Franklin Roosevelt died in office during his fourth term. And then, of course, an amendment was passed at that time that only president can only serve for 2 terms, which is curious because we're going to look at that topic later on in our broadcast today. So that only in polling history, if you will, at this time in their presidency, the only one who had a lower approval rating than Joe Biden is Harry Truman. Now, here's the interesting and the curious thing about this. This, despite the fact that, number one, that the United States of America at this moment has the highest employment rate in U.S. history. There's the highest employment rate at this time in U.S. history. Number two, because of the Build Back Better Act, which was bipartisan and passed through the Congress of the United States, there has been more infrastructure rebuilt during this first term of Joe Biden than in any other term of a presidency in U.S. history. If you remember, over the last 20 years or so, each president from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump and now Joe Biden have all talked about the importance of infrastructure, the importance of rebuilding our roads and our bridges. Numerous studies have been taken. I remember a 60 Minutes piece where they were showing how bridges in America were dangerous and were falling apart and people were using them on a daily basis. And each one of these presidents, President George W. Bush, President Obama, and former President Donald Trump, all talked about infrastructure and how important it was to rebuild the infrastructure within this country, but none of them were able to do it. Well, under the presidency of this guy who the polls show that a majority of people in this country feel that he's too old to run again, the infrastructure here in America is being rebuilt because of the passage of the Build Back Better Act. Bridges are now being repaired. Right here, I'm in the state of Ohio. And I remember last year there was a ribbon cutting ceremony down on the Ohio River between Cincinnati and Frankfort, Kentucky. And Senator Sherrod Brown and also Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and President Biden all stood there on that bridge and cut that ribbon because this bridge was repaired, which was in dangerous disrepair, was repaired because of the Build Back Better Act. not only have bridges been repaired, but roads have been upgraded here in this country. Not only have bridges and roads been upgraded, but also the rail service has been upgraded, all as a result of the Build Back Better. And more could have been done, actually, but because a compromise had to be agreed to in order for this bill to pass, some of the things that the president wanted to see happen, unfortunately, did not happen because the money was not there. But the rebuilding of the infrastructure within this country has begun. And the curious thing about it is that Senate Republicans and congressional Republicans who oppose this bill, and some vehemently so, curiously found their way to ribbon cutting ceremonies in their districts where their districts benefited from what they opposed. So you've had a record rebuilding, if you will, of infrastructure here in the U.S. through the Build Back Better Act, which, by the way, was passed with a bipartisan majority. You've also had expansion of benefits for veterans who were victims of toxic fire pits. You know, veterans who served in Iraq and in Kuwait, who breathed in toxic type of air because of how oil dumps and what have you were set on fire, and they were suffered physically from there, and their benefits were being cut. Well, under this presidency, you saw a record rise in benefits for veterans who were victims of these toxic pits. And again, this was passed primarily and almost exclusively with the Democratic majority, although there were some Republicans, especially in the Senate, who did go along with this. Number 4, the first meaningful gun legislation was passed in this country in the last 30 years. And again, this was a bipartisan effort. This was done with the president working with those within the opposite party to get this done. Now, of course, is it enough? Of course not. But there was no significant gun legislation at all passed in this country for 30 years. Ever since the assault weapons ban of the Crime Bill of 1994 was the last gun legislation that was passed on a national level in this country. And of course, and sadly, that expired in 2004 and was not renewed. And it made sense to have that legislation because, again, this is not my opinion. You can go and do the research for yourself. During the time of the assault weapons ban in the U.S., mass shootings in this country decreased dramatically. Something like between 60 and 80%, it was been estimated. And again, we're not talking about taking people's Second Amendment rights away from them. But as you've said, as you've heard me say, if you're a regular listener to this program, you've heard me say this on numerous occasions on this program, they are called military-style weapons for a reason because they were designed originally for military use. You do not need an AR-15 to go out hunting. First of all, it's going to utterly destroy your prey. So you don't need an AR-15 to go hunting. You don't need an AR-15 to protect your household or to carry with you, whether your state has concealed carry laws or not. You don't need an AR-15 for protection. This, in 30 years, the first significant gun legislation, and again, it wasn't enough, but at least some gun legislation got passed, again, on a bipartisan nature under this administration of which 68% of the people polled in this recent poll thinks is too old to run for a second term. Number 5, you have the strengthening and the expansion of NATO under this administration. As an opposition to the previous president, who had rumblings of talking about pulling the United States out of NATO, which basically would have made NATO crumble. Under this presidency, you've seen the strengthening and the expansion of NATO. And this coalition, this NATO coalition, has stood up, has rather supplied Ukraine in their battle against the expansionist policies of Vladimir Putin, who criminally and unlawfully invaded a sovereign country, who's committed as many war crimes as any other war criminal in the history of this world, who is a gangster's evil criminal thug, and had it not been for the strengthening of NATO and the expansion of NATO now, because now you have Norway and Sweden in there, so now Russia has NATO countries along 800 miles of its border. Had it not been for this, there is a very good chance that Vladimir Putin would be in Kiev right now, and that Ukraine, the entire Ukraine, would be annexed back to Russia. Folks, make no mistake about it. It is the goal of Vladimir Putin to reestablish the old Soviet Union. If he is not stopped, and and the NATO alliance led by the United States, but also with our other NATO allies like Germany and France and England and Poland, etc., supplying Ukraine, if they did not take this stance, and Putin was successful in annexing the entire Ukraine back to Russia, he wasn't going to stop there, people. Estonia was next, Latvia was next, Lithuania was next, Georgia was next. It is his goal to reestablish the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union that broke up after the coming down of the Berlin Wall in 1999. You started to see these former Soviet states become independent countries, like Ukraine, like Latvia, like Georgia, like Estonia, like Lithuania. And that is his desire and his goal. And that is counterproductive to the security of the United States of America, despite what you may hear some pundits on right-wing type media outlets like FOX News, or One American Network, or Newsmax say. It is not to the benefit of the United States of America, despite what you may hear some people, even in some elected officials, say. It is not to the benefit of the United States of America for Russia to win the war in Ukraine. And it's under this presidency that you saw the strengthening and the expansion of NATO to the detriment of Russia and to the betterment strategically and militarily and of the United States of America. So you saw that. But not only did you see that under this administration, also under this administration, the one that 68% of the people polled said that the president is too old to run for a second term. You saw student debt relief for middle class and working class families. Now, I indirectly experienced this personally. Without saying too much, it wasn't my debt relief, but someone very close to me recently got a $10,000 student loan debt forgiveness. And I'm going to tell you that it was very beneficial. And this was under this presidency. Under the presidency of the person who people think 68% of the people polled think is too old to be president. But not only did you have these things, but also under this presidency, you saw the CHIPS Act pass. Again, this was a bipartisan act. The CHIPS Act is set aside $52.7 billion for semiconductor research, and it created jobs. As a matter of fact, it created jobs right here in the state of Ohio as a semiconductor plant was opened recently in the Columbus area. And this was part of this CHIPS Act, which came under this administration. Also, you had he was savvy enough, I should say, in his State of the Union address to get congressional Republicans to pledge that they would not cut Social Security and Medicare. Now, this is from a man who supposedly is feeble-minded, who supposedly can't think well on his feet, who supposedly has some mental deficiency because of his age. And yet, during his State of the Union address, he was politically savvy enough and had enough brain acumen to trick, basically, his opponents, congressional Republicans, to pledge that they would not cut Social Security and Medicare. It is also under this presidency that you saw expansion of the child tax credits to middle class and lower class families. You saw an expansion of the child tax credit. So I just listed all these things, and this is not all of them. I just listed these, what I consider the top 10. I didn't mention the fact that he appointed Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, first black female ever appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. I didn't mention that. I didn't mention, and I give you this, the pullout or the withdrawal from Afghanistan wasn't the smoothest in the world, but he ended the 20-year war in Afghanistan, the longest war in the history of this country. And again, I get it. I know that withdrawal was not without its controversy. I understand that. But the fact of the matter is that the withdrawal did take place, and that this 20-year war, this 20-year involvement, which actually was longer than that, because we just came up on the 22nd anniversary this past Monday of 9/11. So the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan actually was longer than that, but the end of that war came under this term. The acceleration of the vaccinations for the COVID and crisis in the very beginning of this administration was accelerated under this administration. We saw a rebound in the economy because of that. So I'm just pointing out all these things. So you may ask, okay, Jeff, why are you doing this? What's your agenda here? What are you trying to do here? I'm pointing all this out because I have a question. And I'm pretty sure that many of you that are listening to me right now probably feel that Joe Biden is too old to run for a second term. My question is this: what is more important, the age of the person who is running or the effectiveness? Because if it's the age, then that's going to eliminate his most likely opponent in the upcoming election of 2024, and that's Donald Trump, who's only 3.5 years younger than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is 80 years old now. He will be 81 in November, which means when he runs next year, if he's reelected, he will be 82 years old when he starts his second term. And if he serves out the entire term, he'll be 86 years old. Now, before you say, well, G. Jeff, you're proving my point. Donald Trump is 77 years old. He will be 78 years old when the election next year takes place, assuming he's able to run. He's not incarcerated. That's a whole different other story, but I'm assuming that even if he's incarcerated, he will be able to run for president, which is an interesting conundrum there, but I digress. So it is not as though his most likely opponent in the 2024 election is a spring chicken himself. His most likely opponent, as I said, will be 78 years old on election day in 2024. Joe Biden on election day in 2024 will be 81 years old, going on 82 years old. Now, just to give some perspective of this, Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders is 82 years old, which means Bernie Sanders is older than Joe Biden. Okay? Bernie Sanders is older than Joe Biden. He's 82 years old. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa will be 90 years old tomorrow. He was born September the 17th, 1933. He will be 90 years old tomorrow. And I only bring this up because maybe you have, but I have not heard anyone talking about Bernie Sanders being too old to be a senator. Chuck Grassley, who's one of the most influential senators in the Republican Party, I haven't heard anyone talking about Chuck Grassley being too old to be a senator. I haven't heard anyone talking about Donald Trump being too old to run for president. There's a lot of reasons why Donald Trump should not be president, but I have not heard anyone talking about Donald Trump is too old to run for president. So you have to ask yourself this question. Why is it Joe Biden only? Why is it that people are only focusing, Democrats also, not just Republicans? Democrats tout the accomplishments of this administration, which I just laid out a few of them. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of hand-wringing going on because there are a significant percentage of Democrats who do not want Joe Biden to run because they feel he's too old. My question again is, what's most important, age or effectiveness? I lean toward effectiveness. Joe Biden has not shown that he does not have the mental capacity to hold this office based on the accomplishments of this administration, based on the fact that these accomplishments are things that he proposed, that he worked out bipartisanly with Republican senators and congresspeople. It wasn't his aides doing these things. It wasn't someone else stating the policies. These were policies that he himself stated and articulated. Policies that he articulated during his campaign in 2020, and once he was sworn in on January 20th of 2021, these are the things, the policies that he put forward, saying that he wanted to accomplish. And many of the things that he put forward in his platform have been accomplished. Now, has everything been accomplished? No. No, it hasn't. But I would defy you to name me a president who has accomplished everything that they set out to do within their first term. No, we do not have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which Joe Biden supports. He's received some criticism on that. We try to educate people on the show and that the president cannot pass that legislation. That has to pass through the Congress, then go to the Senate, and be passed in the Senate, and then he can sign it into law. It passed the Congress, and it got to the Senate and died because it hasn't even been introduced on the floor of the Senate. This is why you have to go out. If the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is important to you, this is why you have to go out within your various states across this country, wherever you're listening to me. You have to find out, which means you have to do some research. You have to find out where the candidates who are running for Senate in your state stand on this crucial piece of legislation, if it is crucial to you. And once you find out where the candidates who are running for Senate in your state stand on this very crucial piece of legislation, if it's important to you, then that will allow you to decide who are you going to vote for. Example, in the state of Ohio, where I reside, Sherrod Brown is the current senator whose term is up next year for re-election. And he supports the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. His Republican opponent has yet to be determined. However, those who are potential opponents of him, none of them have come out in support of that legislation. So, if you are a resident in the state of Ohio and this voting rights bill is very important to you, then I just did your homework for you. You would then go out and vote for Sherrod Brown. Now, if it's not important to you, then you would vote for his opponent, if it's that issue. Now, there are other issues to consider when you go into the booth to vote. But keep in mind that legislation does not get passed simply because the president wants it to get passed. Does he have influence? Yes. Can he figuratively twist arms? Yes, he can. But if his party does not have a majority, and in some cases a veto-proof majority, which means 60 votes, then he can want it as much as he wants, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be passed. And that's how it operates. So, again, from my standpoint, I'm more concerned about how effective a candidate is as opposed to their chronological date of birth. As long as they have the mental acumen to do the job, then I have no problem voting for them despite their age. And in this case, I don't see any evidence where Joe Biden does not have the mental acumen to do the job. Now, does he stumble on some words sometimes or forgets what he's saying? Yes. But let me ask you this, listener. Do you ever do that? I know I do sometimes. I stumble on words. I forget sometimes what I'm going to say. I sometimes walk into a room and have to remember, what did I come in here for? And while I'm not the brightest person in the world, not by a long shot, I don't think that, I'm going through senility or I don't have mental acumen to do tasks that need to be done. Again, Bernie Sanders, who ran against Joe Biden in the Democratic primary in 2020, is 82 years old right now. Turned 82 a couple weeks ago. He's born September the 8th, 1941. So, if you really want to look at it, Bernie Sanders was born almost 3 months to the day before the United States entered World War II. Yet I haven't heard anybody talk about Bernie Sanders being too old to be senator. I didn't hear anybody talk about when he was running in 2016 and then in 2020 that he was too old to run for president. I'm sure that his supporters now who would like to see him run again for president, I'm sure they don't think that he's too old, and yet he's older than Joe Biden. But what is the real crux of the issue here? A lot of it is focused, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Those who feel that he's too old, their greatest fear is his running mate. and that's Vice President Kamala Harris. There is fear within the Democratic Party that if something were to happen to Joe Biden where he would not be able to continue, that Kamala Harris would not be up to the job. And there is some fear within the Democratic Party, and part of it has already started. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, who's a candidate for president in the Republican Party, has already brought up the issue, basically saying that Joe Biden's not going to survive a second term if he's elected, which, we talked about this on the show a few weeks ago. I didn't know Nikki Haley was God. Only God knows, how long we have on this earth. He's the one who plans our days here on earth from the beginning to the end. But Nikki Haley has come out and said that Joe Biden's not going to survive a second term. And that if you vote for him, you're really voting for Kamala Harris. This black female, that's who you're voting for. Now, I understand what the Republican Party is doing, especially with its strong MAGA base. All right, I understand the game they're playing there, and I'm not even going to get into that or go into that. But the curiosity is the fear within the Democratic Party also, that she would not be up to the task. Well, the only thing so here's my question. When you look at vice presidents, other than Dick Cheney, who some believe basically was the president, who many historians and people on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, felt that he overstepped his bounds when he was vice president. If you look at it, really, vice presidents, who does stand out? There were questions about Joe Biden when he was Barack Obama's vice president. Mike Pence was considered a lapdog to Donald Trump. Dan Quayle was the butt of jokes. It goes on and on. Vice presidents aren't really that highly considered or thought of. I guess the strongest vice president I can remember was Lyndon Baines Johnson because of his influence that he had in the Senate. But until Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson really didn't do anything. He really wasn't a standout. So I don't get it where people think that the vice president is supposed to be this standout. The vice president is supposed to be the support apparatus and mechanism to the president. They can even be their attack dog. Now, what we have seen from Vice President Harris, especially over the since Dobbs was repealed by the Supreme Court last year, what we have seen is her being the front person for abortion rights. She's been the front person. She's been the attack dog, if you will. She's been the one that's been speaking out and speaking strongly about women's right to choose and how this has to be preserved. The president has given support to it, but she's been out there on the forefront. She was the one who went down to the border earlier this year. So there are duties and things that she's doing. Now, part of the trepidation, I guess, within the Democratic Party is that when Kamala Harris was running for president in 2020, she got slow traction and no traction within her campaign. There was infighting within her campaign. But again, we're talking about 4 years ago, and we're talking about that as though this is the person that she is today. Don't you think there could have been some growth going on from then to now? Don't you think that serving as Vice President of the United States has kind of matured her and put her in a position where she could serve?
I have a online question.
Okay.
The write-in is the question they have is: the Constitution calls for a minimum age of 32 years old to be President of the United States. Since some are concerned with Biden's senior age, what is your opinion on amending the Constitution to address maximum age of presidential candidates?
Great question. So, question is, since the Constitution says that you have to be at least 35 years old to be president. So there's a minimum age standard. In other words, there's a floor. The questionnaire, person who sent the question is basically asking, should there be a ceiling?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready to go there yet. And the reason why I'm not ready to go there yet is that what is the arbitrary age then that you would set the ceiling? Now, 35, I'm presuming that it was set at that age because the framers thought that perhaps a person would be mature enough at that time and savvy enough, that politically savvy enough and emotionally, mentally mature enough to handle that office at that time. That's what I'm just presuming is how they came to that age. The reason why I'm not ready to go there yet is that, okay, so where do we cap it? Do we cap it at 70? Do we cap it at 80? Where do we cap it? So I'm not ready to go there yet. What I am ready to do is I'm in favor of the mental capacity tests and those results being made public, and not these ridiculous ones where you show a picture of a dog and they say dog and block whatever. I'm talking about IQ tests. I'm talking about exactly seeing where a person is and how sharp they are mentally. So at this time, I'm not in favor because what is the age? Where do you cap it? And do you eliminate someone who may be a really good candidate for president, but because they are at or near the age limit, then they can't run? What would be the age to cap it? 35 is the floor. What is the ceiling? 65, 70, 75, 80? And who decides that? And what is the criteria that's used to come to that decision? So at this time, no, because as I said, there's too many variables in there to come up with a ceiling age, if you will, for lack of a better term, a ceiling age. Because as I said, what are the variables? What are the criteria going to be used? Should they have a certain, what we were looking more so at a mental capacity, I guess, more so than physical capacity of where they are at that time? And again, how do we come to that age of the ceiling to be the president? So I think whoever sent that question, that's a great question. A great question. Right now, I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm not ready to say that there should be a maximum age. Minimum age I can see because, if you think about it, there are some mature and mentally sharp, mentally capable men, emotionally mature people in their 20s. But for the most part, people don't really mature until they start to get into their 30s and what have you, because they've experienced life. And again, small sample size, using myself for an example, during my 20s, there would be no way that I would be emotionally and mentally mature enough to handle the responsibilities of an office like that. Because I know how I was in my 20s. And I don't think that I was alone at that time. It was during that time that I was growing and growing into maturity. Some who know me may think that you're still growing, that you still haven't matured yet. Okay. So I can understand the age of 35, and again, I would need to do some research on myself to see how that age was determined. But I'm not ready to put a ceiling. Floor, yes. Ceiling, no. It's 55 minutes after the hour, and we're talking about this topic. We're going to go into our next topic here, but I want to finish the hour out in this, and then in our second hour, we're going to talk about, and this is really an offshoot of what we've been talking about here. In our second hour, the first thing I want to deal with is term limits. Should there be term limits for the Senate, the Congress, and the Supreme Court of the United States? Now, that's something that we can talk about putting a cap on, because now we're not talking about so much the age of a person, but the longevity of how of a person to stay in office. The President of the United States arguably is the most powerful person in the world. They are the de facto leader, if you will, of the free world. That's what the title says. The President is the leader of the free world. But the President of the United States, whether they're 35 or 85, can only serve 8 years, which is a good thing. However, within the Congress, within the Senate, and within the Supreme Court, there are no term limits. And that's something that in the second hour that I want to deal with. But very quickly, back to our topic here as we get ready to close out the hour. My criteria when it comes to an elected office, and I don't care if it's dog catcher or president, is not so much how old a person is, but how effective are they in the job if they're an incumbent. How effective I believe they can be if they're a candidate. And what is their record as an incumbent or a candidate? These are the things, people, that we need to look at when choosing elected officials. You need to look at if they are an incumbent. Just don't vote for them because they're an incumbent or they're a familiar name or whatever the case may be. Look at their record. What did they do while they were in office? Did they keep the promises that they made when they were running as much within their power as they are capable of doing so? Are they really representing your interest, or are they representing their own interests? If they are a candidate running against an incumbent, what is their background? What is their experience? Where have they served before? What is their track record? In other words, what I'm saying, people, is do your homework. Just don't get the shiny little, what I call Christmas card, where you've got all the smiling faces and down the whole card, and they're telling you, and you take that to the polls and you just voted. You vote that whole ticket, whether it be Republican or Democrat, whatever the case may be. No, that's lazy. That's trifling. Do some research. Do you realize that these people are making decisions that will affect your life on a daily basis? It affects the city services you will receive. It affects what your taxes will be. It affects your school system. It affects your health care. It affects the infrastructure. It affects everything. Your decision has an effect on every aspect of your life. When it comes to President Biden, and we're going to take our break after this, when it comes to President Biden, ask yourself, not is he too old to run for a second term, but ask yourself, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago when he first ran? You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back at you in about 5 minutes or so. But right now, we're going to hear some commercials, listen to some music. It is the top of the hour across the world. Thank you.
Has violence happened to you or your family member or friend? Violence can affect all parts of your life, sometimes in ways you can't see. Violence can affect the way you eat, sleep, it causes you to lose focus, are angry, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. We're here to tell you violence doesn't have to keep hurting, and you can change your life starting now with help from the Trauma Recovery Center. We want you to take control of your life. Today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So do not let violence control you. You can break free, and TRC can help. Give them a call at 216-644-5487. They will come to you wherever you are. They offer real help for real needs in real time. And they can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. They're free, they're 24/7, and they're confidential. So, look, if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life after violence starting today. Call today. Get the help you need today. The number's on the screen. And if you're listening, 216-644-5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. And also, I do not have our History 365 today, but we would like to take a moment to take the time out to welcome the dedicated Senior Medical Center and their services. Now back to Jeff Doggett on the right side.
Thank you, Decisive. So in our first hour, we talked about, is Joe Biden too old to be president? In our second hour here, we're going to be talking about term limits for the Supreme Court, the Congress of the United States, and the Senate of the United States. We're also going to be talking about, should Ohio State football coach Ryan Day be on the hot seat? Have some thoughts about that. As a matter of fact, they're playing right now. They probably just now kicked off.
Just started, yeah.
And we're going to give our NFL predictions. We're going to give you predictions on 10 NFL games this weekend. So that's what we have for the second hour. Again, our phones are working. They're on delay. 216-939-5087. 216-939-5087 if you want to get in. Also, you can text us or email us on Mixler and Mixcloud as someone did in the first hour. If you want to send questions in that way, and our producer, Decisive, will read your question over the air, and we can then get it answered and talk about it. So, I wanted to start off this hour here, and it's 10 after the hour now. 10 after the hour. I want to start this hour off talking about term limits. At this time in the United States, in our federal government, the only office, ironically, that is term limited is the office of the President of the United States, the highest office in the land. And I'm in favor of that. I'm not in favor of people being president for life. I have a sneaking suspicion, had the 2020 election gone the other way, that the loser of the person who lost that election in 2020, and yes, he did lose the election, had he won that election, I've got a very strong inclination that he would have tried to get the Congress and the Senate to try to get a constitutional amendment throughout the states to amend the Constitution where the president can serve more than 2 terms. Again, I have no concrete evidence of that, but my hunch, my feeling, if you will, is based on the character of that person and the desire that person has for ultimate power. The kind of people that he idolizes are dictators and strongmen, and that's what he wanted to be. And I just believe that had he won the election in 2020, there would have been a move afoot to try to amend the Constitution so that he could run for a 3rd term. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and we'll see what happens next year in 2024. So the president, the most powerful office, the most important office in the land, is term limited at 2 terms. Franklin Roosevelt did serve 4 terms during the 30s and throughout into World War II, but that was the first and only time that happened. And as I said, the Constitution was amended so that the president can only serve for 2 terms. However, the other offices within the federal government, and that is the Congress, 435 representatives in the House of Representatives, that is the Congress, and the Senate, the 100 members of the Senate, and also the 9 members that sit on the bench of the Supreme Court, those are not term limited. That's why you can have, in the first hour I mentioned Chuck Grassley. Chuck Grassley has been senator from Iowa since 1981, when he took over for Orrin Hatch, who passed away. And so he's been senator for over 40 years. Strom Thurmond, who's deceased, but Strom Thurmond was not even effective. They used to have to wheel him out. He served in the Senate until he was 99 years old. And again, I'm not talking about someone being too old. I'm talking about how long they serve. And, there are others who have served in the Senate, both now and in the past, for decades. Joe Biden himself was in the Senate, a senator from Delaware, for decades, and so on. Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. They serve until they die or they retire, and they're not elected. Well, at least not directly. They're indirectly elected because they are appointed by the sitting president, who then come before the Senate for Senate confirmation hearings for them to be confirmed, and very rarely are they not confirmed. And then in the Congress, there are no term limits for congressional offices either. So the question is, should a person be elected to a position or appointed to a position, in the case of the Supreme Court, for life? As we speak right now, there are no laws on the books in this country that will term limit a congressperson, a senator, or a Supreme Court justice. There are none. Which means a person can be in the Senate for as long as they keep getting reelected. They serve 6-year terms, and then when that 6-year term is up, they come up for reelection if they choose to run. The Congress serves 2-year terms, and then once those 2 years are up, they come up for reelection should they choose to run. And as we said just a few moments ago, the Supreme Court justices are appointed by the sitting president, and they serve until they die or retire, whichever comes first. Question is, should it be that way? Is it good for democracy to have people potentially in positions of influence for life? As we said in the first hour, laws are made when they are proposed in the Congress. They pass the Congress and then go to the Senate, where they pass in the Senate and are signed into law by the sitting president, or they can veto it. And then the Senate has the power to override the veto if they have enough votes. So the question is, should these very vital, crucial, and important positions be lifetime positions? Should the Supreme Court, members of the Supreme Court, be able to sit on that bench until they retire or they die? Is that beneficial for democracy? Well, I say a resounding no. I believe that there should be term limits. If the most important position, some may make the argument, in the world, and that is the President of the United States, the single most important elected position in the world, again, you can make that argument, is term limited, then these other offices, which are vital to the running of this government, to this experiment in democracy that we have in this country, those should be term limited as well. No person should hold an office for life.
Yeah, I agree.
It shouldn't be that way. No Supreme Court justice should be able to sit on the bench for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years, making decisions that affect the entire population. Now, you could say, well, you know, Jeff, people should have voted. You don't want these. We do have term limits. They're called elections. There's that argument. But let's look at the facts here. Let's not live in fantasy land. Let's look at the facts here. Unless an incumbent really screws up and does something, I won't even say immoral, because that doesn't make any difference to some voters. But unless they just really screw up and do something stupid or crazy or moral or legal, whatever the case may be, for the most part, incumbents are going to be reelected because the American voter base is lazy. For the most part, the American voting base does not study their candidates. They don't look at what these candidates have or have not done, especially incumbents. Incumbents have an advantage over people who are candidates for that office. Normally, not always, but in the vast majority of cases, when an incumbent is running, he or she is going to be reelected. There are exceptions to the rule. This is not a hard and fast and steady rule, but for the most part, the incumbent is going to win. They have the advantage of the incumbency. They have the advantage of the name recognition. They have the advantage of the fact that their voting base or their constituency is not politically savvy or has not done their homework. And again, I'm not trying to come on here and sound elitist like I know it all, because I don't and I'm not. But I know, for the most part, people really do not do research on candidates. For the most part, people vote a straight ticket. And even when there's a primary in that party, most of the time, the incumbent is going to win the nomination for that party in a primary. Not always, but most of the time. Which then lends to the possibility that they can stay in that position basically for as long as they want. Which then again makes them more vulnerable, in my opinion, and you can disagree at 216-939-5087 or text or email us, makes them more vulnerable to being bought and paid for by special interests. Because special interest groups see that a person is holding an elected office and has been holding this office for, quite some time, and therefore they want favors from that elected official, and that elected official, in turn, to grant these favors, whatever they are, is going to accept money from that special interest group into his or her campaign chest so that they can do what? So that when they run again, they can outspend their opponent because they're being funded by the special interest groups. Now, if you don't believe that happens, then do some research and see who is funding your senator or your congressman. Do me even one better than that. Find out who your congressperson is from your district. Find out who your senator is from your state. Now, I listen to a lot of talk radio. One, because I like it. Two, because I believe iron sharpens iron. So while I don't come on and try to emulate someone I hear on the air, there are some people whose shows that I listen to who I really admire. And I get information from them. Hopefully this show is informative to you. And what I hear on these shows, of course, is people calling in, making comments, complaining about their government, complaining about the president, complaining about this, that, and the other. And there's one particular show, and I'll mention it because it's not in conflict with any show that's on this station. Clay Kane comes on Urban View. And one thing that he does that I admire is when a person is calling, complaining about what's going on in the government, he asks them, who are your senators? And if the person can't answer the question, they get run. So you say, well, what's behind that? Behind that is this. You need to know who's representing you before you call in a show and start complaining about what the government is not doing. You don't even know who's representing you. And so these incumbents have the incumbent advantage. They get money from special interest groups. They have name recognition. And they continue to be re-elected over and over again. Now, I'm not saying that all incumbents are bad and that incumbency is bad, because there are some who are re-elected that are good. There are some people who I voted for who are incumbents. So I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush here and saying that incumbents are bad or they're ineffective or they're bought off. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that these offices were never meant to be lifelong appointments. You were to be a public servant for a term, and then you were to move on. These aren't lifelong appointments. This is not a lifelong profession. This is not like working at Republic Steel or at Ford Motors. By the way, I support the UAW workers who are on strike right now. It's not like being a school teacher or something of that nature. You were not elected to sit in these offices for life, to peddle your influence so that you can line your pockets. You were elected because you were supposed to be there to serve the public, to serve your constituents, to propose legislation that's going to make life better for your constituents. And then you're to get out. So I am very much in favor of term limits. So here's my proposal. Right now, if you're elected as a senator in the United States, you serve a 6-year term. Then after that 6 years is up, you can either decide to run for re-election, or you can decide that you're not going to run and that you're going to get out. If you're in the Congress, which is the House of Representatives, so there's 100 senators. Each state has 2 senators. If you're in the Congress, which is the House of Representatives, there's 435 members of the House. U.S. territories are represented in the House, for example. They serve 2-year terms, and then when that 2 years is up, then they run, or they either decide to run or not run for re-election, whatever the case may be. So before I get to the Supreme Court, let me deal with these 2 branches of the legislative branch of government. Then we'll deal with the judiciary. I would like to see this imposed, that a senator can run for the maximum or serve for the maximum of 3 terms. That's 18 years. Now, if you can't accomplish whatever it is you're setting out to accomplish for your constituency in 18 years, you don't need to be there anyway. You have 3 terms that you can serve. That's 18 years. That's 10 years longer than what the president serves. Just to put it in perspective. You serve 3 terms, which means you're there for 18 years, and then you cannot run for that office anymore. Then it's time for you to move on in life. It's time for you to write your memoirs or, go into the private sector. If you've been a senator for 18 years, you've made enough contacts where you can transition into your private sector pretty easily. 3 terms, 18 years. That's it. No more of this 40 years in the Senate. No more Strom Thurmonds, Chuck Grassley's, Joe Biden, etc. Serve your 18 years, you get in, you get out. It's time to move on. It's time for someone else to come in. That's how you keep fresh ideas, too. That's how government does not become stale. That's how a way that you can have a buffer, if you will, of all the infighting that you see and all the gridlock that you see. Because you're not holding on to these positions for life. It also limits, not eliminates, but limits some of the influence trading that goes on as well. 18 years for the Senate, 3 terms. What about the Congress? 30 minutes after the hour. You listen to the right side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static up. We sure don't bring the noise. It's 30 minutes after the hour now. So what about the Congress? Congress, 5 terms. That's 10 years. Again, you've got 10 years to serve. If you can't get done whatever it is you set out to do within 10 years, as I said, the same thing that I just said about the Senate, saying the same thing about the Congress, you need to get out. Now, serving in the Congress for 10 years does not preclude you from running for Senate if you wish. If you still want to stay as an elected official or what have you, then if you've been in the Senate for 5 terms, gives yourself 10 years, you may have built up enough political cachet where you can make a Senate run and win. Then you can be there another 18 years, so that'll give you 28 years if you're able to be reelected for those terms. But 10 years in the Congress is enough. Again, this is not a lifetime position. And I believe that if you have term limits for these offices, you will get more done. There will be it will not be so much gridlock, so much influence peddling. You might even see more bipartisanship going on. And I know those of you that are listening to me that are opposed, say, well, Jeff, that's not enough time, or, you can't put those kind of limits on, and we do have term limits. It's called elections, but I already just drew the picture for you how difficult it is to remove an incumbent. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to do so. Now to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is that's the judiciary branch of the government. You've got the executive branch, that's the president. You've got the legislative branch, that's the Congress and the Senate. And now you've got the judiciary branch, which is the Supreme Court. There should be a term limit on how long a person can serve as a Supreme Court justice. The Supreme Court is the only branch that's not elected, at least not directly anyway, number one. Number two, they serve for life. And this, folks, is why you hear me and others talk about how elections have consequence. Even though 81 million people in 2020 voted against Donald Trump, the effects of Donald Trump's presidency will last long after he and Joe Biden both are in the grave and long gone. Why do you say that, Jeff? Well, because during the Trump presidency, and political games were played, and this again goes back to what I was saying about the term limits on the Senate, because in the last year of President Barack Obama's term, a Supreme Court position became open, but Mitch McConnell, who was the majority leader, because the Republicans had the majority in the Senate at that time, who was the majority leader, did not even allow the nomination of Merrick Garland, who is the Attorney General now, to even be considered on the floor of the Senate, because he said Barack Obama was a lame duck president and he should not be able to appoint, even though it was his right to do so. And to show you the political games that were played, in 2020, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, this same Mitch McConnell, who was Senate Majority Leader, allowed Donald Trump, who was running for president, was not guaranteed to be elected, allowed him at an even later date to make an appointment to the Supreme Court. So again, without these lifetime positions, it could also possibly eliminate these political games that are being played. But I digress. Let me get back to term limits for the Supreme Court of the United States. The reason that I say if you didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2020, you still have him as president, I say that because during his presidency, he appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. All 3 of those individuals are relatively young, and at least for now, in pretty good health. And again, let me just throw this in here, as my pastor says, parenthetically. I am not wishing bad health on these people. I'm not hoping they get sick and die. But the effects of the Donald Trump presidency will last for about 3, maybe 4 decades. Because these Supreme Court justices will be on the bench, assuming that they stay healthy and they don't meet a tragic death. Question is, should that be the case? The answer, in my opinion, is no. No. Supreme Court justices should not be a life appointment. It should not be that way. There should be term limit. So, you may be asking yourself, all right, Jeff, you said 18 years for a senator, 10 years for a congressperson. What for the Supreme Court? 15 years. You're appointed to it, you serve 15 years, and then you get out, and then the president, who's ever in at that time, can then appoint, or nominate rather, a candidate for the Supreme Court. They can still go through the whole Senate confirmation, I'm not saying remove that, but you serve 15 years. You do not serve a lifetime position. The reason why I'm so adamant on this now, and especially with the Supreme Court, is that, in my opinion, you may disagree with this, and that's fine. You can call us 216-939-5087 or email us. But everything is so politicized now, and in my opinion, at more so at this point in our history than any other time in our nation, that for the betterment of this nation, we need to put these term limit restraints in place. Now, quite frankly, I'm not sitting around holding my breath waiting for this to happen, because if you think about it, do you really believe that the Congress is going to vote to limit their self? No. Do you really believe that the Senate is going to vote to put term limits on how long they can serve? Of course not. So what has to happen? The power is in our hands, people. Throughout the states of this country, you can get petitions signed to get issues on the ballot in your state that would put term limits on how long a senator can serve. We need to see a groundswell of this happen throughout our country. Am I optimistic that this is going to happen? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. One of the reasons a lot of people don't even know that these offices aren't term limited. Also, I know that you're going to be coming up against the opposition to this. You're going to be coming up against how well funded the campaign against this would be. But if you really want to see change in your government, if you really want to see democracy, if you really want to get rid of influence peddling and lobbying and all that, you're not going to totally get rid of it, but if you want to see this diminish and their power and influence diminish, then we have to put term limits on these offices. And really, for the life of me, cannot understand why the American people, both Democrat, Republican, and Independent, why we don't see this. And really, what the opposition to it. If you're opposed to it, I would really like to hear it. 216-939-5087, or you could email us as to why you're in opposition to this. But that's how I see it. Love to see how you see it. It's 40 minutes after the hour. It's 40 minutes after the hour now. You're listening to the right side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static on the show, we bring the noise. Ryan Day is the head football coach at The Ohio State University. And he's been the head football coach there since 2019. In his tenure, the Buckeyes have gone to the college football playoffs at the end of the 2019 season, at the end of the 2020 season, and at the end of the 2022 season. They've won one of those playoff games. They beat Clemson in 2020. They've won 2 Big Ten championships under him. And they've had a stellar record, win-loss wise. They've only lost 2 conference games under his tenure as head coach there. And those 2 were last year and the year before that. They lost the last regular game of the season to their arch rivals, the Wolverines. So some of you listening across the country would then answer this question, of course not. Why would a man with his record, why would he be on the hot seat? He has a stellar record in his conference. His team has, out of the 19, 20, 21, 22, and now going into the 23 season. So of the 4 years going into this season that he's been there, his team has gone to the playoffs 3 of those 4 years. He has 2 Big Ten championships and has an outstanding record both in the Big Ten and out of the conference. So on the surface, it would look to be that this would be a ridiculous question to ask. Is he on the hot seat? But you know what? It's not that ridiculous, because the answer to that question is yes, he is on the hot seat. And here's why. Ryan Day, or any coach for that matter, at Ohio State, is hired to do 2 things. That's one is, and I'm putting them in reverse order. One is to make the playoffs so that he will be in contention to win a national championship. And 2, beat his arch rival, the Wolverines from Ann Arbor. That is the job of the coach at The Ohio State University when it comes to football. It doesn't make any difference that you beat Penn State every year. Yes, Buckeye fan, of which I am. I'm a proud alum. Those of you who listen to the show know that. In case you're new, I'm a proud alum of The Ohio State University. Beating Penn State is great. Beating Michigan State is great. And Wisconsin, Purdue. And unlike his predecessor, Urban Meyer, he's never had the bad upset loss like Urban Meyer had to Purdue in 2018 and to Iowa in 2017. He's never done that. He doesn't have a bad upset loss on his resume. He's been in the, as I said, been in the playoffs. 3 out of the 4 previous seasons he's there. Won a playoff game against Clemson in 2020. Well, actually in January of 2021, but it was a 2020 season. Has won the Big Ten championship in 2019 and 2020. So from an outsider looking in, you would say that this man has done a great job. So why would you say he's on the hot seat? He's on the hot seat, folks, because in the last 2 seasons, and especially last year, he has lost his final game of the year to his arch rival. And to continue to be the coach at The Ohio State University, you cannot lose to that team. Especially when, on paper, you have more talent than they do. You look at Ohio State over the last couple of years or so, they've had a plethora of 4- and 5-star recruits. For those who don't know, a 5-star recruit is a top recruit. 4-star is one notch right below that. They've had more 4- and 5-star recruits than their arch rivals. They've sent more first-round draft picks to the National Football League than their arch rivals. Look around, especially at some of the best young receivers in the NFL. Garrett Wilson with the Jets, Chris Olave with the New Orleans Saints, Jackson Smith and Jigba now with the Seattle Seahawks. There's a plethora of Ohio State players throughout the NFL that were high draft picks. So it's not as though they did not have talent. So the question is, if you have more talent, as evidenced by the number of first round and high draft picks that you're sending to the NFL as opposed to your rival, who has sent some, but not as many as you have, at least in the first 4 years. Now, his arch rivals this year, there's been a lot of talk about all the NFL draft picks that they have on that team and that they could have quite a few first-round draft picks come from their team this year. That remains to be seen. But up until this year, at least, you've had the clear advantage talent-wise, and yet 2 out of the last 3 years, and you didn't play your arch rival in 2020 due to the pandemic that year. The game was canceled. So your record against your arch rival is 1-2. Even though, as I said, and it's not just me. Just look at look at what the draft picks in the NFL are telling you this too. You've had the most talent, and yet not only did you lose, but you lost in a way where you were just dominated on both sides of the ball by that team. In 2021, when you played your arch rivals up in Ann Arbor, that was the first time that they had beaten Ohio State in 10 years. And some people chalk that up as to, well, you know, the Wolverines are going to win one of these games sometime. You're not going to beat them every year. So that was chalked up to that. There was a lot of excuses made about that game, too, about the weather and what have you, but the weather was the same for both teams. But you were thoroughly dominated in the trenches on both sides of the ball. So you come into the 2022 season and you hire a new defensive coordinator and you talk about, you know, how you're going to be prepared for that game and how you've been thinking about that game and your players have been thinking about that game for 365 days of the year. And you have the game in your stadium on, by the way, perfect weather conditions for late November. I believe it was like 60 degrees that day on that Saturday after Thanksgiving. And what happens? In your own building, you lose again by double-digit figures. Now, you somewhat redeemed yourself because a lot of chaos happened after that loss. And you got into the college football playoffs last year, and you took Georgia, the eventual national champions, you took them to the wire, and was a field goal miss away from playing in the national title game, which I believe had you played in that game, you would have won the national title. But here we are again. So here we are for the third year in a row. As I look at this team, and I look at the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten East, I look at Kyle McCord, who's the Buckeyes quarterback, and I look at Drew Aller, who's the quarterback at Penn State, another formidable opponent that they will face, and J.J. McCarthy, the quarterback at the arch rival, would make me believe that they've got the third best quarterback in the Big Ten East. They've got a rougher schedule this year. Next week, after they finish their cupcake games, they play Western Kentucky today. After they finish the cupcake portion of their schedule, they go to South Bend next Saturday to play fifth-ranked Notre Dame. They hit Penn State in Columbus, but they also have to go on the road to Wisconsin. No easy task up there. And then they close the season at their arch rival. There are some within Buckeye Nation who believe that the Buckeyes could suffer as many as 3 losses this year. I don't see it that way, but here's what I do see. If Ohio State loses to their arch rivals again, that will be 3 years in a row. And while I don't think that will cause Ryan Day to lose his job, his seat will be on fire next year. Because they cannot, you cannot continue to lose to your arch rival and keep your job, especially, given the expectations of the fan base and, quite frankly, of the team and yourself. So we're going to keep an eye on this year to see what they do. And especially if they happen to be undefeated going into that game, which is not going to be an easy task given their schedule, which I just went over with you just a moment ago. All the pressure is going to be on him this year to come through, and we'll see what they're going to do. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure don't bring the noise. As we get ready to close out our program today, I'm going to pick 10 NFL games this weekend. As I said at the beginning of the show, this is done for entertainment purposes only. It's not for you to go out and bet the house on, but this is how we see it. The first game I want to look at is on tomorrow. The 1-0 Miami Dolphins travel to New England in Foxborough to take on the 0-1 New England Patriots on Sunday Night Football on NBC tomorrow night. Miami coming off of a huge win in Los Angeles last week against one of probably the most exciting game of the weekend. 38-36 win over the Los Angeles Chargers, are a 3-point favorite. Tua Tagovailoa threw for 446 yards last week. The Cheetah, Tyreek Hill, had over 200 yards in receptions and a couple touchdowns. Jalen Waddle. In other words, folks, the Dolphins, if you haven't seen, they've got a track team out there for receivers. The Dolphins are 3-point favorites in New England. The over-under is 46.5. I picked Miami to cover, and if you're betting the over-under, I would say take the over, because as well as Belichick and as great as a defensive coordinator he is, and he always tries to take away that team's best weapon, it defies logic for me to think that he'll be able to take away Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And as long as Tua can stay healthy, I think the Dolphins will score and score a lot. So I look for them to cover and also bet the over on that. The next one I want to look at is the 0-1 Seattle Seahawks coming off of a home upset at the hands of the Los Angeles Rams. Traveled to Detroit to take on the 1-0 Lions, who are coming off of that huge win last Thursday night that opened the season in Kansas City. The Lions are 4.5 favorites. The over-under on this is 47. I picked Detroit to cover, and I look for the under because both defenses are pretty good, and I think it's going to be a low-scoring affair, but I look for the Lions to cover, and if you're going to bet the over-under, take the under on that. Next game I want to look at is the aforementioned Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs, 0-1, travel to Jacksonville to take on the 1-0 Jaguars. This is a rematch of a divisional playoff game last year in Kansas City, as Kansas City won on their way to the Super Bowl last year. The Chiefs are coming off that disappointing 1-point loss to the Lions last week. They're hoping that they're going to get Travis Kelce back. They got their D tackle back, although defense was not the problem in their game against the Lions. Actually, it was drops by their wide receivers that cost them that game. The Chiefs, surprisingly, are 3.5-point favorites. The over-under is 51.5. I picked Kansas City to rebound this week. They're going to cover the spread, and I would say bet the over in this game. The next one I want to look at are the 1-0 New York Jets at the 1-0 Dallas Cowboys. The Jets suffered the catastrophic injury to Aaron Rodgers last week on Monday night on the fourth play of the game. Torn Achilles, out for the season. The Cowboys just steamrolled the Giants last Sunday in MetLife Stadium on Sunday Night Football. The line has moved from 2 to 9 because of the Aaron Rodgers injury. The Dallas is 9-point favorites. The over-under is 38.5. I look for the Cowboys to win, but I think the Jets will cover. I think that 9.5-point spread is too much, so take the Jets and the points. Bet the under on this because these are two outstanding defenses going at one another. The next game I want to look at is the 1-0 Green Bay Packers at the surprisingly 1-0 Atlanta Falcons. Green Bay is 1.5-point favorites. The over-under is 40. It looks as though that Jordan Love is the real deal. At least he continued their dominance over the Bears last week. I say take Green Bay and the point that will cover, rather, since they are favored. And if you're going to bet the over-under, take the under on that game. The next one I want to look at is the Las Vegas Raiders, 0-1, travel to the 0-1 Buffalo Bills. Buffalo laid an egg. Well, more importantly, more succinctly, I should say, Josh Allen laid an egg last week against the Jets with the 4 turnovers on the Monday night game. The Bills are favored by 8.5 at home. The over-under is 47. I say pick Buffalo and take the over. I think Buffalo is going to rebound in big-time fashion on tomorrow. The next game we want to look at is the Baltimore Ravens travel to Cincinnati to take on the Cincinnati Bengals, the 1-0 Ravens at the 0-1 Bengals. AFC North rivals. The Bengals are favored by 3.5 at home. They're coming off of a tough loss last week in Cleveland to the Browns. The Ravens had a pretty easy game last Sunday at home against the Texans. As I said, the Bengals are favored by 3.5. I say take the Bengals. The over-under is 46.5. I say take the under on that. I look for the Bengals to rebound this week and win at home, as they know they cannot afford to go 0-2, especially 0-2 within the division. The Ravens are dealing with injuries in their secondary, which Joe Burrow should light up that secondary, and they lost running back J.K. Dobbins for the season, unfortunately, with a torn knee ligament, or torn Achilles, I'm sorry.
Dang.
The next game we want to look at is the 1-0 Washington Commanders travel to the 0-1 Denver Broncos. Denver is 3.5-point favorites. The over-under is 38.5. I say pick Washington. I look for Washington not only to cover, but to win this game and to continue the struggles of Russell Wilson. I think the Commanders' defense is really very good. A lot of people don't know that because they look at the Commanders as being a lower type team, but trust me, that team with the law firm, those what I call their front four, Sweat, Payne, Allen, and maybe they'll get Chase Young back, is going to make life rough for Russell Wilson this week. The next game, as we are close to our close of our show that I want to look at, is the San Francisco 49ers, 1-0, coming off a dominant win at Acrisure Stadium in Pittsburgh last Sunday, 30-7 over the Steelers. Traveled to the surprisingly 1-0 Los Angeles Rams, who upset the Seattle Seahawks last week. The 49ers are 7.5-point favorites. The over-under on this game is 45.5. The Niners have one of, if not the best defense in the league. They're dominant on the front. They're dominant in the linebacker. Fred Warner is arguably, and I don't think there's an argument about it, the best middle linebacker in the NFL. And they're deep in their secondary. Over-under is 45.5. San Francisco will cover, and I say bet the under. And my last game that I want to pick is the Monday night game at the aforementioned Acrisure Stadium in Pittsburgh, where the 1-0 Cleveland Browns travel to the 0-1 Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns are coming off a very dominant defensive performance last Sunday in Cleveland in their opener against a high-powered Cincinnati offense where they held them to 3 points and held Joe Burrow to his worst passing game ever, probably maybe in his whole career, high school and college combined. Where he only threw for 82 yards, held the Bengals to 3 points. The Steelers are coming off of a very disappointing and humiliating defeat at home at the hands of the San Francisco 49ers. Cleveland, for the first time in ages, is favored. They're 2.5-point favorites. The over-under on this game is 38.5. And I'm picking Cleveland to go to 2-0 for the first time since 1993.
All right.
To cover the spread, I look for Cleveland to win this game 23-14.
Woo.
I say take the under on this game. The under is 38.5, and I think it's going to come under. I just think that the Cleveland defense is for real. Pittsburgh showed last week that they can be run on, as Christian McCaffrey had a big game. And Nick Chubb rushed for 106 yards last week against the Bengals. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with rookie tackle DeJuan Jones as he has to go off Defensive Player of the Year T.J. Watt of the Steelers. But the Steelers have lost a very important part of their defense in Cam Hayward, especially there in the middle to stop the run. They also lost Deontay Johnson, one of their top receivers last week. And so I look for the Browns to finally win in Pittsburgh for the first time in the regular season since 2003 and come back to Cleveland 2-0. So there are my picks. You can do with them what you want. As I said, this is for entertainment purposes only. As we close the show, as we do each and every week, our hero and zero of the week. Our hero of the week, and I'm going to do this every year around this time. Our hero of the week, posthumously, are all of the people who lost their lives on 9/11 22 years ago. For every passenger on American 11 and American 77 and United 175 and United 93, those passengers who tried to overtake that plane and cause it not to reach its target at the Capitol building. For every firefighter and police officer who lost their lives in the Twin Towers, for every office worker in the Twin Towers and at the Pentagon that lost their lives, you all are true American heroes. For every passenger on those flights, you are true American heroes, and we laud you and we commend you, and we keep your family in our prayers. Our zero of the week is Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who has jelly for a backbone, who has capitulated to the Freedom Caucus of his party and has brought about some ridiculous impeachment proceedings against President Joe Biden, where there's nothing, there's just a pure waste of time. And instead of wasting the time doing this, why are they not trying to pass some legislation that will help the people of the United States of America? So that's it. That's our hero and our zero of the week. You've been listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure don't bring the noise. But right now, I see that my time is up. Thank you very much for your time, and until next Saturday at 3 p.m., Shalom.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in to The Right Side with your host, Jeff Doggett, here on the station where we don't bring no static, but we sure enough bring the noise on staticradio.net. We want you to make sure that you guys check us out on social media, where we absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio LLC. On Twitter, also, well, now known as X at No Static_Radio. On YouTube at No Static Radio. On Instagram at No Static Radio, the real _No Static Radio, and of course our newest platform, Discover.tv. Same thing on No Static Radio Media over there. We would also like to, invite you in to listen to some of our replays. All shows can be replayed, and you can listen to them on Mixler and Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio, all one word, in the toolbar for replays of this show and all others on the platform, including shows that go back as far as 2013 and 2009, you guys. So go take a look. We have a deep archive. We have some celebrities that come from No Static Radio, and some of their shows, well, all of their shows while they were here are on the No Static Radio site on Mixler and Mixcloud, and they are archived, so go check them out. And for an uninterrupted listening experience, that means no refreshing the page and sit back, relax, and wait for us to pop up with a little commercial or two on TuneIn.com, live on liveradio.net, or MediaQ. Just type in No Static Radio, same thing, all the word in the toolbar for continuous streaming of this show on all others on the platform. And for all things No Static Radio, including up-and-coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here, please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net, you guys, to be a part of the show, all things up and coming, everything. We got some pretty cool stuff going on here. And if you guys aren't aware, the Tri-C Homecoming is going on. Also, the 20th anniversary of the Nerve DJ regime. So go check them out over there at Tri-C. You got Eric Scratch Paper Wilson over there, Cleve Reezy, who was previously a guest on this past Thursday Solomon Pope radio show. So you guys go enjoy the musical environment. Tons of dope artists here from Cleveland and around, around the world, professional and independent artists. So please go check out the Tri-C Homecoming. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you for your time on this sensational Saturday. And you know what it is? We've always got more music for your listening pleasure here on your Voice of the Revolution. NoStaticRadio.net, powered by Google, partner with Colors, Cleveland Food Bank, and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines, the Cleveland Rugby League, Design Me Exclusively, and the Dedicated Senior Medical Center. You guys have a great one. Be safe. Enjoy this good weather we got left. The countdown begins, you guys. And we'll talk to you on Monday with coffee and Black Anthropy. Until then, peace, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.